Super Monkey Ball. The concept is simple. You're a monkey in a ball, and your main objective is to reach the goal on each floor by navigating various obstacles and hazards, with the difficulties of the floors ranging from fairly easy to absolute insanity. It can be a pretty challenging game, and then there's the people that make it look easy. At first glance, this seems ridiculous. Like, how is one person meant to keep their balance while going back and forth across absurdly thin wires? This has always been a fascinating topic to me, and I wanted to find out just how they managed to pull it off. For instance, how long has it taken them to get so good?
So I had the game as a child, right? I really enjoyed it. I played it a bunch with like my friends. We ended up beating a lot of the earlier difficulties and then trying for expert eventually. But in terms of when my focus shifted to speedrunning, I watched an AGDQ run of Monkey Ball 1. I kind of watched the run and thought, I think I could do that.
I think I might have played like at a friend's house a couple times growing up, but I saw Barhunga speedrunning SMB1 Master on Speedruns Live in like 2013 or so. I think I purchased a copy of SMB2 in like early 2014, and I just like started trying out individual levels, and I thought it was really fun from the start, so I played a whole lot of IOs pretty much since then.
I actually didn't grow up playing the game. I kind of got into it from watching IL compilations, and I just thought it would be cool to try and do speedruns and all that, so my focus was always pretty much on speedrunning for individual levels. I feel like the most improvement was for the first like 3 years, probably from 2013 to 2015. I grew a lot as a player. Probably to the skill level where I'm at now, probably took until 2020, so that would be 7 years.
For somebody else to get to the skill level I'm at now, if they played regularly, I don't think it would take long. I'm not very good. I have really bad reaction speed. But I think the main thing for improvement is just playing more and diversifying the kind of floors that you're going for scores on. In my eyes, the best players are the ones who have a solid set of scores across all the floors in the game.
As you heard, there are a couple different ways people competitively play these games, both full game speedruns and runs of individual levels. For Super Monkey Ball 1, this comes from the main game mode, which has different difficulties. This means that if you run through the beginner difficulty, you'd have 10 stages to complete, and if you manage to pass the 10 stages without losing a life, there's an additional 3 stages in beginner extra. The higher the difficulty, the more stages you have to clear, but the one that's given people the most grief is expert. 50 stages of very hard challenges, and an additional 10 expert extra stages if you don't lose all your lives, which would result in having to use a continue.
I remember it probably being in like 5th grade or something, being like, you know what, I'm gonna get to the expert extra stages in Super Monkey Ball 1, because I'd like done a ton of stuff. I'd unlocked all the stages, SMB2, gotten like beginner extra, advanced extra, but not expert extra. I didn't even know at the time that you had to get through expert without losing a continue. I thought you actually had to do it deathless. So I actually went and like really deliberately tried to like practice levels, but just naturally you're gonna get better at the game doing that.
While yes, it is difficult to not fall off and die multiple times over the course of an expert to expert extra run, if you can manage to not use a continue at all after beating both expert and expert extra, you're greeted with one more surprise. Welcome to the Master Floors. 10 of the hardest levels that Amusement Vision, the creators of the original Monkey Ball games, could make, ranging from really bizarre timing on moving platforms to an absolute gauntlet of thin wires and other similar bullshit. When watching speedruns of this difficulty, it doesn't seem to faze them that much. Rather, they'll pull off strategies that are even harder than what's required to beat the stage. Now, there's a definite distinction between Super Monkey Ball 1 and its sequel. As well as having more mini-games, new levels, and a story mode, the way the game feels to play is also different. Now, would this be due to a physics change, or something else?
So what I really like about the physics in Monkey Ball 1 is it feels like it's a lot quicker in turning. So I feel like, yeah, I have a lot of control in like the micro adjusting for small wires and such, which are, yeah, there's lots of those in that game. But I think also because of the stages in the game, they're a lot smaller and they kind of require a lot more of that balance as opposed to Monkey Ball 2, for example, where it's like big open levels that you run around in a bunch.
So the interesting thing about SMB 1 and 2 is that the level design differs so much that it makes it difficult to compare the physics, at least in my opinion. There is Deluxe, which has the levels from both games in the same physics, so you could try to compare them that way, but since Deluxe is on Xbox and PS2, the controls are different, so kind of tough to make a direct comparison.
I like Monkey Ball 1. It feels pretty good. I can do ILs in Monkey Ball 1 just fine, but the full game just feels a little weird. It feels weird to do full game runs on that engine. I play all the Monkey Ball 2 ROM hacks as well, you know, Gaiden, Launch, Stardust, etc. Because the engine just feels so perfect. And it spoiled me to the point where, like, when I play new Marble Roller games, you know, like spiritual successors, or even new, like, core Monkey Ball games, it just doesn't do it for me.
Well, the physics alone can be pretty janky at times. Getting random speed bumps from nothing, or rolling straight over edges when you obviously should have gotten collision. But even with that, SMB 1 and 2 are without a doubt above any other Marble Roller I've ever played, even after like 20 odd years.
Generally, like, in most cases where there's a difference, SMB 2 is better. So, like, for example, in SMB 1, the camera cannot point straight down. So if you're trying to, like, fall onto something, say free fall in the beginning of Expert, if you were playing that with the Super Monkey Ball 1 camera, you would basically have to 100% rely on the minimap to be able to land anywhere remotely. So I like SMB2's camera a lot better for that. It turns slower, which kind of sounds like it would be bad, but I think the way it enables like boosting tech, it's basically just making full use of the fact that you have a square gate for your controller, so if you're holding a diagonal, you're getting like a stronger push that way.
But like that's the core issue with Banana Mania, is why it feels so dreadful to play. For absolutely no reason, they switched to using a circular dead zone instead of a square, so diagonal inputs aren't stronger than cardinals. And like that would be fine if they didn't reuse flaws from 20-year-old games that were designed around having stronger diagonal inputs. Like it makes stuff that should be trivial really hard for such a BS reason.
I'm a physics major, and this game largely inspired my affinity for physics because there's so much like math and physics just with the mechanics of Monkey Ball, and like you have to apply principles to like get strategies to work out.
Even with practicing and figuring out which game you'd prefer, the stuff that competitive players do across both games can look ridiculous, which makes you wonder how long they spend doing certain levels and full game categories over and over.
I would say on average, maybe 1.5 to 2 hours. Some of my long grinds, I think they'll go for like 10 to 15 hours before I burn myself out. And usually when that happens, I'll take a break for like 6 months to 24 months or something, and then I'll come back eventually and do it all over again and still not achieve it.
I hosted tournaments for individual levels. For years and years, I've hosted like 6 or 7 individual level tournaments where 2 players go head to head. I like ILing a lot. A lot of my best friends in Monkey Ball are ILers primarily. I put up a bounty for anybody who could get a full stretch of 10 levels in challenge mode, get the IL record for them in either score or time. So like E1, E2, E3, E4, on and on until 10, or like 11 through 20, whatever it is. And my buddy Tony, one of the best ILers that Monkey Ball's ever seen, he decided to go for it.
I decided to do Expert 1 through 10 in Monkey Ball 2 because I already had, I want to say 4 of the 10 records in that set. You know, it was pretty tough getting a lot of them, but nothing compared to Jump Machine, which I saved for last. I knew it would be the hardest.
This was made even more difficult by the fact that the record holder at the time, Nambo, had improved the score record for a second time during when Tony was grinding for his own world record score.
And I would say I think I put 50 to 60 hours into that. It took me like 3 weeks of playing.
Well, it was night after night after night. It just became a running joke where Tony would clock in for his job at Jump Machine.
I would say that was probably particularly challenging for me as well because the strategy actually kind of hurt my hand, which is weird. Like, I don't really get hand pain or anything playing Monkey Ball, but the inputs you have to do on that level are very strange. Yeah, I ended up tying the record, which was held by Nambo. And yeah, I ended up winning the bounty, which I'm really proud of.
I can't accurately say what average time it takes to get an IL because it's just like it's all over the board. Sometimes you can get it within minutes. Other times it's like 2 years. The first stage that I ever tried to go for was Stepping Stones. I remember seeing Trademark Toys on YouTube. He got 50-46, and it was a strategy in which you go down the left and you bounce down the first 2 steps normally and then get a little low clip on the third one that gives you enough speed to bounce on the 4th and then bounce on the 5th. I remember just thinking, oh my God, I've got to see if you can just clip off of that 3rd platform without going down. It took like 4 or 5 hours that evening, and then I finally got 5103 in story mode, and then later that day I got 5088. And then Sieve, getting an airtime hit successful, that took like 2 or 3 years. I started going for that like in 2017 or 2018. The strategy I was trying to implement at the time was like getting hit backwards by the thin sieve moving piece and then getting hit backward going to get like a lucky collision off of one of the moving pieces on the circular part. But like I never landed back on the platform. And then in 2020, I tried a totally different approach. And oh my God, when I got that to work out, I was living with my family at the time. And when I got that record, I freaked them out. The phrase jumping for joy.
Yeah! Oh yeah!
The amount of time players spend to beat times and scores, and even set records, varies largely. But there's also a huge difference between playing one level and playing a whole game. While individual level runs strictly use the in-game timer, with runs going for a time improvement needing to get a higher number given that the clock counts down, full game runs not only use an outside timer, but in some cases can be even more daunting to run against.
Like if there's a category in Monkey Ball 2 and I want to get record in it from the ground up, it's hours a day for a couple weeks usually. Like if I do 4 hours a day for a few weeks in most categories, I'm confident that I can either get record or get a bunch of deep record paces. My favorite run I've ever done is my expert speedrun in 15 minutes and 3 seconds. Overall, you know, I'm biased obviously because it's mine, but I think overall that's the best RTA Monkey Ball run that has ever been done. It's like within 7 seconds of my sum of best in a 15-minute category. That was 4 weeks, 7 hours a day. Like it was a full-time job for a month, basically, of playing expert because it's such an intense category and the level of perfection required to get that run was so high. I've always found advanced, even though it's only an 8-minute and change category, I've always found that to be one of the hardest to grind because the first split is so hard to get out of and it's so boring. There's so many hard levels and they're just not very fun. So resetting in the first split at advanced for 3-4 straight hours is just one of the worst days you can have as a Monkey Ball streamer.
Despite how grueling playing these games at a top level can be, some players will still want to push the boundaries.
I think the point where I like most improved my own skill was when I started speedrunning Super Monkey Ball 651 in mid 2019, basically right after that hack came out. That was one of the first hacks that had like really, really challenging levels. I started with 651, and I actually very, very clearly remember in Amoeba's first playthrough of 651, he was in World 10 and he was saying like, you know, unfortunately, I think this is too difficult to speedrun. And I was like, no, it's not. This is so doable. This is so speedrunnable. You know, I really wanted to make it a good speedrun, which I feel like I did a pretty good job of. So there's that, but then also the Kaizo Monkey Ball run, that was actually something I did like on a whim in October 2019. I was just doing some Kaizo Monkey Ball speedruns because all the times I'd seen seemed like there was like way too many deaths, way more than you could probably do it in. So I was like, okay, let's try and improve this a little bit. So I did more stuff there, it brought the time down a little more, felt pretty satisfied.
Now, even though most people are willing to grind as long as they have to reach their goals, it seems almost inevitable a select few would wind up to be bad actors, and for a time get away with cheated accomplishments, most notably from certain ILers who would take advantage of a technique that involves rapidly spamming the pause button in order for them to greatly increase their reaction time, which would end up being largely banned from competition. In fact, Goober13MD would form an alliance with Ike and another prominent Monkey Ball figure, Silverboxer, setting the record straight in videos posted to YouTube. After these revelations were brought to light, the community would eventually move on from all this. Unsure if there was still lingering suspicion, I asked everyone if they thought there could still be some nefarious activities at play among the communities, though I would end up receiving a mostly resounding no, mainly thanks to the smaller community size of trusted individuals who regularly livestream their attempts. There would also be a feature to help separate the live plays, in which a person will stream or record their attempts while actively attempting the level, from those where the only proof is recording an in-game saved replay, which has potential for many nefarious acts such as pause spamming. This easy live play distinction would show up in the individual level score leaderboards on a website called SMB Elite, developed by Tony SMB. Now the rapid pausing method would be wholly restricted across all individual level competition, as it was common knowledge that this would be unfair to compete against. If a human player couldn't normally react super fast like this, then what was the point of competition? That's where there's an interesting subcategory of strategy for real-time runs, and it involves pausing, but not just rapidly spamming the menu to react to stuff. No, this would be more methodical, and its roots would even go as far back as a year after the series' console inception. These are the pause frames. You see, instead of just going with the flow and pausing, seeing if you can clear the stage, players would have a known set of precise moments to pause, thanks to the in-game timer, after which you'd hold a direction on the control stick before unpausing, allowing you to move precisely where you want to go at just the right time. This means if you follow everything to a T, you could consistently clear difficult stages, making it much better for the people doing full game speedruns.
As I understand, shortly after Monkey Ball 2 was released in 2002, there was a fella called Snapdragon, who I think is one of the founders of the Elite.net, the GoldenEye website. And he started posting to the forums what he called exact timing strats. And you know how in Monkey Ball 2 there's a few flaws where you can reach the goal by just holding up from the start? He basically found that there were a decent number of other flaws where this worked, so long as you waited at the start and paused at a specific time before holding up. In fact, there's still a strategy guide on GameFAQs from 2002 with a list of all the strats on there.
Okay, so how are these pause strats allowed for individual level runs on this now inoperative leaderboard website Elite Scores? I thought it was banned from all IL attempts.
I'm not entirely sure what led up to these strats being allowed on Elite Scores, but it was the perfect timing strats specifically that were allowed, and not all forms of pausing. The rule itself, as horribly as it's written, it makes the distinction that this is allowed and rapid pausing isn't.
There are a whole range of opinions when it comes to the modern-day pausing strategy. Some believe it's not a legitimate way to competitively play, while others argue it's a whole new ballgame, where you have to learn a bunch of frames for a ton of levels and react to them quickly, all while maintaining speed. Though it's now banned for individual level runs, as it would be unfair when most people are playing the game without using the strat, there are full game run categories where you can either play paused or pauseless.
I guess in the beginning of RTA for this game, I never really felt it was that bad. There was, I want to say, one flaw that it was ever really used on. Like in most speedrun games, pause buffering has always been like a valid trade-off. Like when you're using real time, you're using some of that time for consistency in terms of pausing. Pauses themselves are very instant in this game, so they're pretty easy to use. The problem I feel now, though, is that they've kind of gone way too far. There are entire documents and all the pause strats you can learn now, and to be honest, I just don't want to be going through all of that.
Particularly if you're going for records, whether RTA or IL, it is cheating because, again, it gives you a clear advantage over those that are playing fluidly because you're able to line up frames perfectly the way you want, or at least with a lot better accuracy. And it changes up the game. But even when you're doing it, not going for records, it can just kind of take the fun and challenge out of gameplay, and it's less satisfying when you get your goal. But I mean, that's up to you.
It's a different skill, which is a very, very interesting and in-depth skill that people can develop. It's just not one that I personally am interested in getting better at. Because for the most part, it's like, I do RTAs and ILs and I play the game because I think it's fun and I want to do the parts that I think are the most fun. I used to think that pause speedruns are like the cheap way to play the game. It's another very like skillful, cool way to play the game. It's just not what I want to do,
Even though there are mixed opinions about the strategy in general, there is a real challenge to pausing, as while you do have a theoretically infinite amount of time to react to certain situations, when doing a real-time speedrun, that amount of time you set up the pause frames gets added to your final time. So at the end of the day, most of the challenge comes from nailing those pause frames. Even if you have to buffer a little bit, this can make some stages dreadful to play.
It's a legit intense skill. I think the hardest pause strats in RTA are miles harder than the hardest pauseless strats. I'm also the best pauseless RTAer in the world, so I'm not like some pause zombie who's like, I use pausing in all my records, so it's the greatest thing ever. I prefer pauseless gameplay to pause. I would rather do 5 difficult pauseless strats, like a folders or a spiral bridge or an 8 bracelets, whatever it is. I'd rather do 5 of those than do curve bridge or gimmick pausing. The pausing is outrageously hard, and it's outrageously hard to do consistently and fast. And I think people who come into a stream for the first time and watch an RTA run are just like, oh, this is just guaranteed because you just have to pause on the frames, And I think that's kind of close-minded.
Whether or not people may see this as being cheap or unfair, you can't deny that there is skill in being able to pause fast and on time, or even very quickly buffering pause inputs to inch the timer ever so slightly, on top of the uncertainty of if a person will even be able to get a strategy like that as fast as possible.
I'd say there's merit, if someone enjoys doing RTA pause runs, like why not? It exists on the leaderboard, so, as long as it's separated, then I don't think there's a reason not to allow people.
All of that aside, the Monkey Ball community at large are some of the most dedicated players I've seen, devoting hundreds of thousands of hours into beating their own personal best scores and times, even if at times it's just by a slim margin.
Gotta shout out Scrap as like the god of ILing Monkey Ball 2. I mean, just the other day he got a giant comb time record using a strat that had never been pulled off by a human being before, and I feel like that's like the 10th stage he's done that on in 2024 alone.
The way that works is I have to get hit by the comb on a specific frame, and then the frame after that, the comb hits me into the side of the stage, which pops me up into the air. That one was fun. I labbed that entire method live on stream, so anyone who was there could have seen me figure that out in real time.
People have been trying to do that for like 10 years. It's so cool. It finally happened. It's just nobody could find a good way to do it until Scrap, so.
I'd say Scrap and Pinto Bean have probably been the biggest influence on new strat development for ILs in recent years, in terms of like the real new things. Like EX5, a strat like that, I would have never thought of. Like, I saw that, I was like, oh my god. It's like, Scrap, how do you think of this?
Another one that stands out, I got this a while ago and it's no longer a record, but going for pro skaters score strategy, the strategy before was getting hit by the first one, getting sent up to grab the second bunch, and then coming down, grabbing the third bunch, and then going up the half pipe, grabbing the fourth, and then in goal. Out of nowhere was like, okay, I know it's super crazy unlikely, but I'm gonna see if I can try to get a post-goal strategy working. It was less than an hour that I did the same strategy, but instead of going down and grabbing the third banana bunch on the left and then riding up, then fourth banana and then goal, going down into the goal from the top, grabbing the third banana bunch as post goal, and then by sheer luck getting hit at exactly the right angle by the side of the goal to send the ball down the half pipe, and then grabbing the fourth banana as a second post goal bunch. When I got that, I was in shock that it actually worked. Like, there's no way that I could get the angle right, and it sent me like perfectly centered into the banana. I was like, what?
There are so many stories I was told about that it's honestly hard to try to cram into a 20-minute video, but there was one that stuck out to me. because it involved a world record improvement that not even the record holder realized he had.
So after we cleared the leaderboards of the cheated scores, we were trying to fill in all the blanks of like what legit scores, like to the best of our knowledge, are the actual records on these floors. And on E45, we thought, or at least I thought, SDKS had the record with 5,860, because in Smiling Jack's high score reel, he had, I can't remember what the score was, but it was worse than SDKS. I was like, oh, SDKS has the better score, we'll put that up there. But Scrap told me that Smiling Jack had a better score, and I couldn't find any proof of it. I mean, the only video of his scores were like his high score reels that are still on YouTube. And then a few years after the fact, I actually got in touch with Smiling Jack, and I brought this up to him. I said, Scrap thinks that you have a better score than SDKS, and Smiling Jack said, no, I don't remember it. And then one day when I was scrubbing through Clo forums, I found Smiling Jack's personal high score thread, and in there he had written a score of 5,882 on E45. I was like, oh, he actually does have a better score than SDKS. So I sent Smiling Jack the link to the forum archive, and I was like, look, you have a post here, it says you have a better score. And he said, I'll check through my replays, and he actually still had the replay saved. So after like 19 years or something, 18 or 19 years, Smiling Jack was able to provide proof for a record that he didn't even know that he had.
These are the stories from the Monkey Ball communities, both old and new, that aren't talked about much. There are more questions and stories from these interviews, so without making this video too long, if you want to hear more from these Super Monkey Ball pros, let me know down in the comments below. Speaking of which, a big thank you to everyone who agreed to the interviews. I hope to do similar videos to this in the future. But with that being said, thank you for watching, and until next time, take care and peace.